But hey, maybe he just forgot in the time between this video and his initial video. In his original video, he claimed to have played through the game twice before writing and recording, so surely he won't make any mistakes like,
In Bioshock, splicers felt like monsters, but in a way they actually were. They were certainly no longer human and were driven mad either by their genetic modifications, living in a tin can at the bottom of the sea, or simply witnessing the horrors of Rapture's fall. Here, though, there's no justification for why everyday townsfolk will bum rush Booker with a suicidal fervor and insatiable bloodlust.
Campster. Campster. Campster! Those are soldiers! How? How is it possible to be this brazenly ignorant? You played the game twice and had the time to write, record, and edit this, and not once did you notice the uniforms. Is Campster just telling a lie and praying we're too stupid to call him out on it? Well, let's just give him the benefit of the doubt. How many civilians do we fight in the game? Well, throughout the race to the tower, the only people resembling citizens that we fight are members of the Order of the Raven, a subsect of Comstock's cult, so they don't count. In Duke and Dimwit, we fight military police. In the Hall of Heroes, we fight renegade soldiers. In Finkton, we fight police and, possibly, a man protecting his property. Later on, we have Fink's job interview, which I've conceded is poor in a previous video. After that, more military police, bandits in Shantytown, then the Vox Populi, and the founders for the rest of the game. The only civilian you fight after that is a guy you find hiding in his home in Emporia, and he attacks you without any attempt at civility. So, the only instances in which you actually fight civilians can be counted on one hand, and even then, there is a justification to them, however weak you might consider it. Even if this is a problem, it's not broad enough in scale to justify this criticism. Well, maybe Campster is arguing that it doesn't make sense for the military police. Even so, he's wrong.
Prophecy is my business, Mr. DeWitt. As blood as yours. You know why these men will die for me? Because I have seen their future in the glory. And hence they are content.
Follow me!
On one side of our land stands the false shepherd. And the other, the remnants of the heretical Vox Populus. Which one of you men will not gladly go to his reward to see her safely to her destiny? Rejoice! Rejoice! Death has no sting!
This is the moment we trained for. The false shepherd is here. The day was not exact, but the prophet's sight proves out again. The specimen must be taken alive. If she dies, I suspect they will give us to the bird, and whatever pieces it leaves behind will bear no names. That was cigarette number 6. This waiting is insufferable.
That last one was the leader of the ambush, by the way. The same one where Booker could get his hand stabbed. Between the promises and the threats, Comstock's men have plenty of incentive to keep going after Booker. Of course, there's also the Vox Populi, who serve as 50% of the game's enemies. What's their motive? They're fighting to destroy the Founders, and they're using the narrative of Booker's sacrifice to do it. The living version of Booker is a threat to this. So, those who still believe in the cause are more than willing to lay down their lives to maintain this story.
You couldn't have known this would happen.
I had a role in this catastrophe. If you want to pretend that we're purely innocents in this, then that's your prerogative, but...
Hello? Fink?
I saw you die, Booker. Saw it with my own eyes.
Fitzroy. Listen, I got you your guns. I'm here for my airship.
But my Booker DeWitt died for the Vox Populi. You either an imposter or a ghost. My Booker DeWitt was a hero to the cause, a story to tell your children. You just complicate the narrative.
The fact that this alleged fake killed Daisy Fitzroy probably doesn't help Booker in this department. You're not exposing how poorly thought out Infinite is. You're just revealing that you're so self-centered and materialistic that you can't empathize with someone who's willing to die for a greater cause. This isn't a matter of opinion or you disliking something that I like. You're just wrong. Goodness, how this wasn't enough to shoot his credibility in the foot right here astounds me.
Rapture felt like a place where atom addicts were stalking you for their next fix. Bioshock Infinite feels like a game that puts enemies in your way because it's a video game, and that's what video games do.
No, in Infinite, it feels more like you're a lone wolf fighting against a large military machine, outnumbered and outweaponed in every corner. Of course, to understand this requires one to understand the story, and Capster seems to think that this is what townsfolk look like, so he probably doesn't understand the story at all.
The handyman fights are a great example of this. They're Bioshock Infinite's equivalent of Big Daddies. It's even implied that they're based on Fink overhearing Shu Chong and Tenenbaum's research. In Bioshock, Big Daddies would roam the halls and warn you away if you got too close, but you had to actively transgress to start combat. These fights were, at least until the end of the game, major events that had you gather resources and plan for them. But when you were ready, you could attempt to slay one of these huge beasts, and when you killed him, he'd let out a tortured moan as his little sister would sob over the body. What happened to her then was up to you. Big Daddy fights had a sense of anticipation and player preparation leading up to them that climaxed in this combination of victory tinged with a bit of sadness. In Bioshock Infinite, handyman attacks are just scripted events that come whenever the designers think they'd look the coolest. A big guy in a metal suit shows up and wails on you like he's a stock mini-boss out of Double Dragon. There's no tension, just a war of attrition as you try to whittle his health down before moving on, indifferent to the whole affair. These monsters don't have a meaningful place in the world the way the Big Daddies did. Your fights with them don't have any emotional stakes the way your fights with Big Daddies did. The result just feels hollow and clumsy in comparison.
Suspense, Campster. The word you're looking for here is suspense. That's what every Big Daddy Clash came with. The handymen may not have suspense, but they offer plenty of tension. They absorb a lot of damage, they deal a lot of damage, and they are constantly at your heels until the moment they die. Every clash with them is tense. They just lack the suspense building up to them. For reference, the iconic T-Rex scene from Jurassic Park is largely suspenseful because you have the massive beast looming over everyone. But when it attacks, that's when the tension flares up. The lack of slow build-up before the car chase didn't deter this. But let's look at Gamefront's Bioshock Infinite playthrough as an example. How does Mitchell feel when the handyman shows up?
Any more? There's another one up there.
I have
Get
some.
over here!
Need this?
Thank
Much
you.
obliged.
All right, let's see if we can get on top of that. Whoa, there's a bunch of guys over here.
Get away from me!
Yeah.
Fuck away!
Whoa! Oh, it's a big guy! Big guy! Big guy! Big guy! Big guy!
Run!
Get me out of here! Is that handyman? Yep. Oh god! It hurts! Hurts pretty bad. Why are you doing this to me? I did nothing. Gotta get to the vending machine.
I don't know. That sounds pretty tense to me. As for the narrative, the handymen are given appropriate positions in the story. The first handyman was summoned to get Elizabeth. The encounter with him is supposed to be a pivotal part in rekindling Booker's relationship with her, as she recognizes the greater danger versus Booker's ability. Admittedly, this one could have been bolstered a bit, but to say it adds nothing is incorrect. The second handyman appears during the showdown with Fitzroy. Since Fitzroy is the leader of one of the two key factions of the Civil War, making her a secondary antagonist, this counts as a major turning point in the story where the conflict goes from bad to worse. So the emergence of a handyman, a high-level enemy, is perfectly apt. The third handyman appears late into Emporia. Admittedly, there isn't much development for the main plot here. However, this fight is a major set piece in the middle of the Emporia portions, whose narrative is primarily driven by gameplay, so it is tonally appropriate for where it is. And the final handyman serves as the penultimate fight of the entire game. It is Comstock's last line of defense, comparable to the Strider that Gordon Freeman has to get past before reaching Breen in Half-Life 2. Moreover, it mirrors both the twin Big Sister boss battle in Bioshock 2 and the son Big Daddy encounter before the final boss in Bioshock 1, so it serves as another beat in the game's narrative of constants and variables. That's enough for the narrative portion of the handyman. I'll discuss the gameplay aspect later, because that War of Attrition comment is extremely poor.
They're just a particularly frustrating generic bad guy that prevents you from getting to another quiet conversation with Elizabeth or a small moment with a Colombian citizen.
Before I move on, I want to dwell on Campster's complaint about how these fights get in the way of a quiet moment with Elizabeth and other scenes, as it speaks to a greater implication. Campster isn't upset that the fights are out of place. Rather, he thinks they're out of place because they keep him from what he wants. He doesn't like the fights, but he likes the quiet moments. Ergo, they do not fit together. This is grossly untrue. Just because you dislike one element and love another does not mean that they are at odds. On top of that, the fact that these quiet moments come at the heels of big fights is part of what makes those moments so good. They're Booker and Elizabeth's chance to breathe after the turmoil, and they're our reward for having completed the fight. I know that there is a lot of debate around the concept of story as reward, but I firmly believe that this concept is part of what makes video game stories so strong, particularly those that are adventures. In an adventure, the hero is embarking on a great journey. He has to overcome many obstacles before getting to his goal, or something that will allow him to reach it. By locking in the story behind a challenging level or fight, the game is inviting us to feel that same sense of accomplishment. A strong example of this is the underrated classic, Maximo vs. Army of Zin. In the game's events, an army of soul-stealing robots is set loose upon the land. In order to save everyone, Maximo must embark on a long odyssey from location to location to discover the origins of the Zin, as well as the key to destroying them. Both he and the player must forge their way through various fights and environmental challenges, as well as save many an NPC, some of whom are suggested to be following us. The game is admittedly cheesy, not taking itself too seriously, but it presents stakes every step of the way. A little over halfway through the game, we reach the Great Vault, which is said to have been the Zin's prison. Maximo insists upon entering the vault so as to learn how they escaped. After a brief clash with the Baron guarding the vault, we are treated to this.
Well, Maximo, it seems you have finally repaid me.
Baron, we could fight all night, but that won't keep those people out there from getting slaughtered. This isn't about our past, it's about their future.
This terror has to end, my love. You are their only hope.
If it must be done, then we open the vault. For 500 years, the world has feared what lies within this vault.
The time for fear is over.
Morgan.
your hands off of her!
Come, my sin. Take your revenge. Tear them to pieces and take their souls. Show no mercy.
There's an interesting bit of emotional trickery at work here, with the increase in the graphics. To a young player, this was the game's way of communicating that this scene was important. You just reached a pivotal moment in the events of this conflict. This isn't just a key scene for Maximo, it's a key scene for you as well. Yes, it's not trying to be important, which Capster will surely use as a point against me, but that's irrelevant. My point here is less about politics and theme, and more about how locking the story behind action can bolster it. In this regard, these games are 100% comparable. This feeling is a big part of what makes the ending of Bioshock Infinite so good. It's not just the visuals and the plot twists, it's that I had to earn this moment. Kempster is underselling the emotional weight of the structure, and it's not for the better. Like extra credits, I strongly suspect that he just wanted to watch Bioshock Infinite, the movie, free of challenge.
And that's to say nothing of the infinite spawning Ghost Mom boss, or the Protect the Generator level, or the giant scripted airship takedown, or the transparently scripted chase sequence leading up to Comstock's ship.
I'm going to avoid serious commentary on the Siren and the final battle. I want to save them both for another video with another critic. However, I want to comment on his point about the scripted Zeppelin fight. Campster is making an obvious reference to the 15-minute demo, in which the player is given the choice between shooting down the Zeppelin, calling in a turret to destroy it on his or her behalf, or riding the skyline straight up to it. In the finished product, there is a Zeppelin encounter in Finkton. This encounter has only one option: ride up to it and destroy it. Seems like they failed their promise, no? Well, no. During the final battle, 3 more Zeppelins come in to fight Booker, and you can't end the battle until all 3 have been destroyed. The primary means of attacking them given to the player is the Songbird, but what most players don't know is that you can ride the Skylines up to them. In other words, they were able to redeem the promise from the demo, albeit on a smaller scale. And I will go so far as to say that it's more convenient. This tactic will allow you to save the Songbird for other enemies, and you can even use this method with the Songbird to take out the twin Zeppelin simultaneously, making you feel like an action hero teaming up with his nemesis. Unfortunately, you can't shoot them down, as was shown in the demo. At best, you can shoot off the turret of one of the Zeppelins, effectively crippling it, but ordinary soldiers will continue to spawn in groups of 4 until either you or the Songbird bring it down. So, the choice teased from the 15-minute demo was fulfilled, just to a less extreme degree. In fact, I will argue that they probably made that Zeppelin encounter in the middle scripted as a form of tutorial to teach the players that they can do this ahead of time.
In a very palpable way, Bioshock Infinite is far more contrived, gamey, and artificial than Bioshock ever was.
Fair enough, that moment is an issue. However, you are in context again. What's going on here is that the player triggered something that caused these impoverished citizens to believe that Booker is intending harm. This is one of those hand on your gun moments that Ken Levine boasted that they wanted to do. Does it work? No. There are problems with how these moments are implemented. However, these scenes are few and far between, with the bulk of them being condensed around the Finkton arc, which I have conceded has many problems. This isn't a strong reflection of the game.
And that goes for the environmental design too. The entire game feels less like a trip to a city in the clouds and more like a trip to Walt Disney World. No small part of this is due to all of the turn-of-the-century Americana, but the sense of artificiality goes quite deeper than that. The entire game is suffocatingly linear, and you'll find yourself wondering why a city of free-floating islands has only one path in and out of any given area, and whether men, women, and children all use skyhooks to get around.
Linearity is not a flaw in and of itself. Some of the greatest games ever made were linear. Portal, Limbo, Crash Bandicoot. Portal is a puzzle game, and while Aperture Science is an iconic and memorable setting, the fact that we can't explore it isn't a failing. If anything, giving us a chance to explore it is annoying, as it gets in the way of the physics-based puzzles. Limbo is a 2D platformer with trial and error puzzle sequences, topped off with some black humor. While it is gorgeous, we're not here to explore, we're here to figure out how to get past all these brain teasers. And Crash Bandicoot is an obstacle course game. It's about figuring out how to survive as you descend a corridor. While it is true that Columbia is open, Infinite, as stated many times before, is prioritizing action. A linear level design helps it to pace itself by giving players an emphasis on combat, topped off with breaks in between each arena to find supplies or else listen to those slow moments. I'll explore this a little more in the gameplay portion. And that's all without getting into the fact that the linearity serves to emphasize the conflict of destiny. Booker and Elizabeth are actively fighting against Comstock's prophecy, which is locked to happen in every reality. Making it so that you can't explore, that you're going down a corridor, stresses that.
DeWitt, you struggle against prophecy like a stone loosed from a sling. How thrilling to launch, how breathtaking the apex, and how terrifying the descent as gravity drags you down into the inevitable.
For all his complaints about dissonance, Capser's implicit desire for a non-linear game would have created just that. Also, the Colombians get around on gondolas, various skyboats, and parts of Colombia connecting and disconnecting. We see examples of all three multiple times throughout the game, as well as countless docking ports with docking schedules. You even show an example in your own video.
I'm going to say this up front. There's a lot to love in Bioshock Infinite. The game is one of the most jaw-droppingly gorgeous games in recent memory, thanks mostly to some deft art direction. It evokes a turn-of-the-century charm with an almost Norman Rockwell sense of idealism, and the visuals are steeped in a three-pronged soundtrack that has original scores, licensed period music, and old-timey covers of pop songs from the last 50 years. It's hard not to be moved at some point during the game, either by jaw-droppingly gorgeous vistas or cleverly rearranged covers of a song.
And I know you know this, Campster, because one of your friends pointed this out to you in the Diecast special.
There's a little personal thing that always bothers me in video games like this, and Bioshock Infinite had it more than regular Bioshock, is that this doesn't feel like a city where a whole lot of people could live, because it's really small. It is just really a set of corridors, if you get down to it. And they're really beautiful corridors, but there's not a whole lot of houses and not a whole lot of living space, and there's only a few shops. And if I start thinking about it, this Columbia could house like 100 people, maybe 200. And that's obviously not what they're going for.
That's the problem too, which is that, like, it's clear there's always like buildings off in the background, but what you can explore is a tiny area, and all the gates are usually down, and it's aside from a couple of levels, it's really super linear.
Right. I think it could have benefited more from. There's some signs that you can see early on that are docking times for different areas of Colombia, and it's implied that like the city restructures itself along set times to allow people access to parks and the like. And that would have been neat if you could just have been on like a moving section of the city that was actually obviously moving.
Or if you just see a skyscraper slowly descend into this open gap or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
They do a bit of that at the beginning. You do see a couple of connections.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, but it doesn't do anything with it gameplay, but it is a neat idea.
I think that compared to Rapture, the setting, the metaphor of the setting really doesn't help it. Rapture probably wasn't much more open than Bioshock Infinite, but Rapture feels more open because it felt intentionally claustrophobic because it was basically a giant submarine at the bottom of the sea.
Most importantly, don't joke the civilians are using the skylines. It never happens once at any point in the game, and there are still people claiming that it does, despite the lack of evidence.
There are plenty of doors to nowhere and environmental design meant to funnel you down the intended path. Giant signs label Shantytown and the factory and the Hall of Heroes to announce that you're entering a differently themed area, the way signs might point out how you're entering Frontierland or Tomorrowland at Disney.
It's important for game developers to inform the players as to what they have to work with, and that includes level design. In general, artistic mediums need to use exaggeration to help the audience understand what's going on. Too much subtlety and too much realism can hurt art. This is the primary reason that Elizabeth has this cartoonish, doll-like face, so that we can see her expressions from a distance without the game having to hijack control from us.
I would say, speaking of comments and stuff, some of the reactions to Judas When It Dropped, it was like, oh, this is Bioshock in space. So what we were looking to get from you is why is it like being perceived, or why do you think it could be like Bioshock in space, but also why it isn't, more importantly?
Well, to some degree, why it isn't is I think more you guys can tell me that from your experience with it. But I think that obviously I've got a particular, like Wes Anderson or like Scorsese, I've got a particular eye, right? And I've got a particular taste. So a lot of my games have a lot of similarities. Like one of the reasons I think Bioshock holds up so well visually from what what people tell me is because it's not hyper realistic looking. So I tend to lean into exaggeration. One of the reasons for that is emotions project really well, because we don't tend to do I'm not, Neil Druckmann does something a very certain way, which has a lot of cutscenes, and he's able to use that, and he's able to transfer that skill set to, making the TV show. But I don't tend to do lots of cutscenes and things like that. So not a lot of close-ups on your characters' faces. So the characters have to project at a great distance. To me, the world is a lot of storytelling. So we don't control the camera in the world. We're not doing pre-play stuff. So the world there's a lot of subtle work we do to make sure people see what we want them to see, even though we're not taking control of their head and pointing them in the right direction. So I tend to lean into exaggeration. I tend to, I'm very sensitive to color. I tend to, I grew up, we were just talking about Spider-Man before. One of the great things about that early era, am I allowed to get nerdy about superhero stuff?
Absolutely.
This is it.
With, like the Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko era is because the printing technology was so rudimentary. They had about 15 colors, and the colors would just like draw a number of, this is the color. They tend to deal in these very iconic looking characters with big, bold blocks of color. So you look at Elizabeth in Bioshock Infinite, she's usually a 2-color, she's, blue and white or gold, so she has very simple color combinations because it reads. So there's a lot of things about what I like. I tend to lean into exaggeration the same way Wes Anderson leans into, formalism and symmetry and things like that because it helps him. It's a lens he views the world, and it's a lens he views storytelling.
Also, several of the examples you use don't even agree with your thesis. The Hall of Heroes is a museum stationed next to a literal carnival, complete with merchandise. It's part of an amusement park in-universe. The Good Time Club is, well, a club. Of course it would have a big sign, like any business would. You played this game twice. You should know this. Why would you use these examples? Well, I'll give you this, Camster. The doors to nowhere are jarring. You know what they say about broken clocks. However, the two you found are the only ones of their kind. Any other doors that lead to nowhere are locked off.
You'll see crowded beaches and city streets one moment, and as soon as combat begins, they're curiously empty, as though Columbia also has the ability to transform itself into a gladiatorial arena at a moment's notice.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but if a shootout suddenly started, I would get running from it as quickly as possible. And when there's military police available, chances are they'll be pushing people back.
The experience is one of playing a first-person shooter themed after the Magic Kingdom's Main Street USA. It's a gorgeous, lovingly crafted homage to turn-of-the-century small-town America, but it's also very obviously a scaled-down facade, and instead of emptying out for a parade, it empties out so you can throw fire grenades at people. Columbia may be beautiful, but it also feels hollow and artificial. But while the emotional tone of the game may be lacking and the setting of Columbia may be flawed, it's the gameplay that ultimately tipped the scales against Bioshock Infinite for me. At this point, just about the entire soul of the game's legacy has been stripped away. You can play System Shock 2, Bioshock, and Bioshock 2, and chart how their Ultima Underworld influence is lessened as they've become more and more a stock shooter with every iteration. With Bioshock Infinite, that transformation is more or less complete. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, Human Revolution simplified or removed a lot of Deus Ex's mechanics, but it still felt true to the series, yet modern. But the mechanics they've settled on haven't transformed the game into a streamlined version of itself. Arguably, that's what the first Bioshock did when it modernized System Shock 2. Instead, they've taken a game franchise that has been traditionally about resource management and planning with an action twist, and boiled it completely down to a stock shooter.
Oh, we'll see, Camster. We'll see. I know you're going to say that the combat doesn't work, and I know exactly what arguments you're going to use, but we're out of time. I'm going to defend Infinite's combat next time. Thank you for sitting through this, dear viewers. This was an exhausting video to make, but I hope I've opened a few more minds with this one. See you all in part 2.